Hello, Reject. Hello, Scrub. What are you doing today? Oh, I just got up and I'm just looking across the hills there and admiring just how nice we have it out here. Well, it's not going to be nice for long. They reckon we're going to have some wind turbines coming. Wind turbines? How many do you reckon? Oh, at least 100, they say. I don't know about that.
Who are we? For those who don't know, and most of you probably do, but we're the Eastern Mount Lofty Ranges Landscape Guardians. We're sort of a conservation, greenie, tree-hugging group of people. I think it's a fair call. Most of us are like that. There's probably some very left-wing and some very right-wing people, but they keep that under their hats, so we don't know. Our personal lives are basically, we plant trees and we fence off rivers and we look after things. Most of us have long environmental, ecological backgrounds. But we've looked at this wind farm thing and we think that it's a smelly thing. It's been painted green, but we're not quite sure. So tonight we're just going to run some facts past you. We're going to look at more of the background behind wind farms, what the political settings are, what the economic settings are, what some of the broader environmental issues that are created. So we're not attacking wind farms, but we do think there's a lot of information behind the scenes that people need to sort of get their heads around, because that partially explains why a bunch of greenies would be opposing wind farms. So the gentleman who's going to present is Mr. Brad Reynolds. He's the first speaker. In his real life, he's an accountant. The second speaker is Dr. Paul Kay, and in his real life, he's an engineer. And my name's Tony Walker. I'm the chair of this organisation, and in my real life, I'm an auditor. We all have or had connections with pieces of land, so we've got a varied background. But we come to this in an analytical way, and I'd like Mr. Reynolds, if you would care to start now. And his topic is RECs and wind power subsidies.
Thanks, Tony. So I live in Eden Valley, and look, to be honest, I was actually a real advocate of wind power when the whole thing first sort of started out many years ago, and I was reading about these things, and I thought, yeah, actually wind power is actually pretty good. And I really didn't have any major issues with it. I even heard about the Accountant wind farm well before it was public knowledge. And even at that time I thought, yeah, that's okay. I won't be a NIMBY. I think it's not too bad. I'll tacitly support it. And then came the wind farm night, the information night at Accountant, and I thought, these things are pretty big. And the whole thing's actually fairly large, but I thought, no, I won't go jumping up and down just yet. What I found was that I thought, well, let's do some research on these things. And the more that I researched these things, the more that I discovered that, in fact, there are some real serious issues with these things. As an accountant, I looked at it from the point of view of, okay, well, they're free. Are they really free? And I thought, well, I've discovered that, in fact, no, that's not really the case. There is actually a lot of money that is spent by the taxpayer, that is you and me, to actually support these things. And then they say that they're clean and they're green, and once again I discovered that in fact they're not that clean and they're not that green. In fact, Tony's going to be following that up a little bit more later. Then I looked at the whole infrastructure of the whole things, and what Paul's going to talk about a lot tonight is the whole infrastructure and how, in fact, when you plug wind farms into these things, it doesn't actually work that well. But I'm an accountant. I'm going to talk about RECs, and wind farm subsidies. So let's get on to it. What are RECs, and subsidies? RECs is the renewable energy target. You might have heard about that it's sort of in the news. There's a review going on at the moment, and at the end of that review, something is going to go into Parliament, and someone's going to have to vote on it to make some changes to that REC. We'll talk about what the REC is and how it all fits together. The renewable energy certificate is the next thing I'm going to speak about, and that really is the icing on the cake for the renewable energy sector. It's the thing that really makes the money and makes it the whole business model work. And it all plugs into the renewable energy target. We'll talk about how all that works. And then we'll talk about the subsidies. I don't know, some of you might have heard Alan Jones on the radio from time to time, and he talks about these subsidies for wind farm operators. And I always thought, well, what are the subsidies? So I had a bit of a look into it all, and we'll go through what those subsidies are. Okay, so let's start with this renewable energy target. What's it all about? There are two versions of this renewable energy target. The first one was back in 2001 when John Howard was in power. And what he did was he said, okay, let's set a target of 9,500 gigawatts or 9.5 terawatts of renewable energy has to be generated out of our total energy consumption by 2010. And that works out to roughly 5%. Now, in fact, what happened was that we met that target in 2006, just out of interest. The second version came along in as part of Kevin Rudd's platform for election in 2007, and I got there 2009. That's actually when it became legislation. And what Kevin did was he said, let's do 20 by 2020. He liked his jingles, and this particular jingle was 20 by 2020. And how that comes about, what he did was he said, okay, well, what is our projected energy needs by 2020? What do we reckon we're going to be using in total for power by 2020? And they worked out that that's going to be about 300,000 gigawatts. And in fact, I think Tony's going to go and explain to us that in fact we're not even going to get close to using that amount. That's actually probably an overestimate. Then what they did was they said, all right, it's going to be 20% of that 300,000, so 20% of that is 60,000 gigawatts, less what is already out there. So there's 15,000 gigawatts of power that's already generated by renewables. So I said, let's forget about that. So 60 less 15 gives us 45,000 gigawatt hours is our renewable energy target. Now that also includes solar panels. So anybody got solar panels? Yeah, just the whole room puts their hand up just about. That 45,000 includes solar panels, and in fact what happened was that the wind industry started jumping up and down because the renewable energy certificate price started to drop away. And so what they did was they split it and they said, okay, 41,000 gigawatt hours is for the wind industry, or in fact not just wind, but the whole industrial strength side of things, and the other 4,000 gigawatt hours is for the solar and little small technology. That 45,000 is our target for 2020, but it's actually stepped. So from now through until 2020, you'll see that each year we get further and further and closer to that 45. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the amount is for 2010, but it's just in steps, so it might be 30,000 now, and then it's 32, and then 34, and then eventually we get up to 45,000 by 2020. But that's the federal side of things. There's also the state side of things. South Australia has its own renewable energy target. Earlier on, a few years ago, that target was 20% of all energy in South Australia was going to be generated from renewable energy, and that target was supposed to be met by 2014. It was met by 2011. So come 2011, we met our 20%, and they thought, oh, that's no good. What are we going to do? So they said, okay, let's make it 33% by 2020. And once again, I think, Paul, you're going to talk about how if you get up to 33%, things start to get a bit wobbly when you start getting energy that is generated in that sort of way. Victoria also had a renewable energy target of its own of 5% of whatever the federal one was, so an extra 5% on top. But they actually scrapped that, so they don't actually have a renewable energy target anymore. We're the only ones that do, apart from the federal one. Okay, so it's all very well having this this target, but how does it all work? Well, what you need is a renewable energy certificate. Now, that's actually an American one. We don't actually have any paper ones. We don't have fancy paper ones with little gold stamps on them or anything. The Australian system of certificates is actually all electronic. But it looks good, and it gives me something to show you. Okay, so how does this renewable energy certificate thing work? Well, 1 megawatt hour gives you one renewable energy certificate. So you see these, you might have your solar energy system is 3.2 kilowatts or something. Well, you need quite a lot before you get to your one megawatt. And some of these, the turbines are 3 or 4 or 5 megawatts. So every hour they're producing 3 or 4 of these certificates. Who buys them and why? Well, why they buy them is because they have to, because it's legislation. Who buys them? It's actually anybody who purchases wholesale electricity. Now you all buy. Well, I'm assuming you all buy power. You don't. You have to buy it from the grid. And if that's the case, then you're buying from a retailer, and that retailer has to buy from a wholesaler. So your retailer, the person that you buy power from, has to buy renewable energy certificates. And on top of that, you also get large users of power who might just buy directly, buy wholesale, or they buy from the producer themselves. So you get someone like BHP, for example. They've got a dirty great big smelter somewhere, and that needs lots of power. And they go, well, we're not going to buy it from AGL. We'll just buy it from someone that owns a power station. We'll just buy it straight from them. In that case, BHP would be buying wholesale, and so therefore BHP would also be required to buy renewable energy certificates. What if they don't buy them, or what if they don't buy enough of them? Well, there's actually what they call a shortfall penalty, and it's $40 per megawatt hour. So at the end of the year, they work out how many renewable energy certificates they bought and how many they should have bought, and whatever the difference is, assuming there's a difference, if it's a shortfall, then they actually have to spend or pay the government $40 per megawatt hour for that. And what that in fact essentially does, when you look at how much is one REC, that really it sets the maximum price. The ceiling price is going to be $40, because if it's more than that, then you just pay the penalty. It's cheaper. The average price this year to date for large generation certificates, that is the ones from wind farms and the like, is $35 at the moment. Interestingly, when we did this presentation back in Mount Pleasant, it was $38. So they just dropped in price slightly. This gives you an idea of the price of renewable energy certificates at the moment. So as you can see, the price has actually been slowly dropping over the period of the graph, and that's fairly indicative of what's been happening, and that's why the wind industry is jumping up and down, because their renewable energy certificates are dropping in price, and while they drop in price, their business model starts to get a bit wobbly, and so then investment in them is less of a thing for them. The bottom graph is actually small-scale technology certificates. That's the ones that you have, because remember I said before we split the market. That's for little solar panels and stuff like that. There's a Act of Parliament that says that if you're a wholesaler of power, then you've actually got to buy that power from wind farms first. And the reason for that really is because wind farms aren't always turning, so therefore they go, well, when they are turning, you've got to buy the power. So wind farms in many ways have actually got this little deal going with the government where they're a protected industry. They're guaranteed to be able to sell their power. And essentially what that means, though, is it actually it results in us paying for our wind power 3 times. Firstly, we pay for it when it's first generated, which is fair enough. The things start generating power, you go, okay, we buy it. And because of this buy wind power first, we're forced to buy it, but that's okay. So we need the power, we buy it. But secondly, we've got this renewable energy certificate that I just told you about. So now you're paying for the power, but you're also paying for this renewable energy certificate. Now you won't pay for it directly, but you'll pay for it indirectly because your power bill will be a little bit higher. AGL, if you buy your power from AGL, for example, they've had to buy this renewable energy certificate. It's a cost to them. They're going to want to recover that cost somehow. You're the consumer, so they're just going to say, well, sorry, but you're going to be paying more. In fact, so that you might buy a car. The car's got metal in it. That metal was produced by BHP. The car's going to cost you a little bit more. Anything that's got anything that uses energy, or anyone that uses energy that you buy their product from, there's going to be that little bit of an extra price there. The third one is a little bit sort of a little bit more hidden, if you like. But if you have to buy your wind power first, then that means that there's actually a coal station or a gas station sitting to one side, not doing anything while the wind's blowing. But it actually has to stay there, and it actually has to keep running because it has to keep its water hot, so that when the power suddenly stops, they can just open the tap on and let that steam out and start spinning their turbines. But they've got to have that coal going, and they've got to have that water hot, and that means that someone has to pay for that, and that someone is you, because you need your power whenever you want to flick a switch, like we just did earlier, and we want the power back on. You expect it just to work. So there you go, you're paying for your power 3 times. Now, and Paul, I keep telling everybody what it is you're going to say. Hopefully you do say these things. There's actually a fourth way as well, and it's all to do with the infrastructure. Because of the wind farms, we have a different infrastructure. Someone's got to pay for that as well. So there is a fourth way. Another subsidy is called the South Australian Renewable Energy Rebate Scheme. It's a South Australian government one, and it all relates to payroll tax. 100% rebate of payroll tax. So when, like for example, the Snowtown extension is happening at the moment, they're employing lots of people and there's lots of things happening up there, they're not paying any payroll tax. There's a maximum rebate of $1 million per project, so once they hit $1 million in payroll tax, which is actually a fair bit of salary, I might say, then they actually start to pay, but nevertheless the first $1 million is free. But the thing is that the project must be started between the 1st of July 2010 and the 30th of June 2014. So any new project, so the Accountant one, for example, if it ever gets off the ground, which it won't, of course, that project would not be eligible for this scheme. There's also the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. That's an Australian government thing. Now it's in the budget as being knocked out, I think, but it's still in existence for the moment because there are still projects that are running. Essentially, it finances renewable energy projects. It helps to fund things that banks and so on won't finance. And I sort of think, well, if they won't finance it, then maybe there's a reason for that. As I say to clients, sometimes I get a client that will jump up and down and go, oh, look, the bank hasn't been giving me the money. And I sort of go to them, well, if they didn't give you the money, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe it's not a good project. Maybe it won't work. And I sort of think the same thing with this. There must be a reason why other investors won't invest in them. Why should we as taxpayers? Currently, there's $900 million loaned out, and the average return at the moment is 7%, which isn't actually too bad. But it's the average return. So that means that there'll be some projects that are actually generating more than that, but there are also some projects generating less than that. And I'd be sort of going, well, why are you doing that? Why would you be financing something that's less than a market value thing? Nevertheless, it's being done. Council rates is another form of subsidy in that in South Australia, only the pads and roads on a block of land where a turbine is placed are valued by the valuer general. When you look at the wind turbine structures, they're considered to be plant and equipment. If you've ever been to one of these things, you'll see all the little nuts all the way around the base. I don't know if you've ever been there. They've got the nuts a lot. They're this size, they're huge. There's dozens of them all the way around the base. So the thing's just screwed to the ground. So it's not a permanent structure according to the government. It's a temporary structure. It might be there for 25 years, but it's only temporary. And so what that means is that it's not valued. So it might be $3 or $4 million worth of stuff in the sky there, but it's not included for the purposes of valuation for rates notices and so on. So therefore your council rates, or the council rates of those people that are landholders, are actually cheaper, which means that, and of course usually with commercial rents, the council rates are passed on to the person that's renting, which in this case would be the wind farm operator, so they're not paying higher rates. And also, in my case, I'm living along a dirt road that's going to be feeding the development of the Accountant wind farm, but we won't, because they won't be paying any rates or any additional rates, then our roads won't be getting any extra work done on them, but that would be paid for by the council rates. This one's a little bit different in that they talk about the fossil fuel subsidy being the diesel rebates. Anyone here a farmer? Yeah, a couple of farmers, yeah, a few of them. Okay, you get diesel rebates? Yep, nodding heads, okay. Do you know why you get a diesel rebate when you're as a farmer?
We use our vehicles in the paddocks.
Because exactly, you use your vehicles in the paddocks, not on the roads. And that's exactly what happens with the mining industry. They use those trucks and diggers and things that you can see there. They don't use them on the road, but they still pay the diesel excise. So the argument is for these people, for miners and so on, is that, well, we're paying this excise, which is supposed to go towards the roads, but we're not using the roads, so we shouldn't pay the excise. Fair call. It's the argument that farmers use, and it's the argument that these guys use. Unfortunately, people like Environment Victoria use it as they try and argue that that's actually a fossil fuel subsidy. I don't wear that one myself, but that's me. Wind farms actually get the road transport diesel rebate. Are there any road transport people here in the... No? Okay. That they get a 12 cent per litre rebate if you're transporting heavy goods. So that's a heavy good. They get a rebate for it. Something else that's interesting about that photo, when you actually look at it, and it's this. That truck is registered in New South Wales. That truck was built in the United States. It's a Freightliner truck. It's carting German blades. They're Siemens blades. You can see the brand over here. So they're made in Germany. They were shipped on a German ship. Then they were attached at Snowtown to Siemens turbines, which are made in Germany. They were put there by cranes that were hired from Ireland and Germany, all sitting on towers that were made in Victoria. They're being maintained by Siemens, which is a German company, and they've actually got a contract to look after them for the term of their life. And it's all on behalf of a developer and owner that is a New Zealand company. The only thing in that photograph that is South Australian is the landscape. Everything else is from overseas or from interstate. I'm not. I mean, it really annoys me when they talk about a $1 billion investment, or in the case of I'm not sure about the Trustpower one, but I know the Cainton one was $242 million, and most of that's not being spent in South Australia. When they talk about there's $1 billion in this project or that project, most of it's not staying in the state. Most of it's going overseas or interstate. And that picture in many ways encapsulates that. Okay, so what can I do? Have this information session tonight, but information is useless if you don't use it. So what are you going to do about it? You've got to spread the word. Okay, look, I'm here, I'm spreading the word tonight. I'm doing my bit. You guys have to go out and do your bit wherever you can. It might be writing a letter to the newspapers. For the first time in my life, I've written letters to the newspaper. And I know there are other people here tonight who have done the same thing. Keep doing it. Contact politicians, because this renewable energy target is actually coming up for debate and voting very shortly, in a matter of weeks. So you really need to sort of get your head around it a little bit, write to the politicians, particularly in the Senate, and if I can say so, to the Palmer United Party, because they really do hold this balance of power, and they really are at the moment leaning towards being in favour of this renewable energy target.
Some wind turbines, they cost a lot of money to put up, and then they cost a lot of money to repair, and they're not really worth it at the end for how much money they're actually going to make and for what they're going to save. Well, that's a good point. What about when they start building them up and making tracks and blasting the earth? Isn't that going to make the rocks up on top of the hills come down? Well, I hope they thought about that as well. What about all the dust and stuff that's going to come with the wind and blast my house? That's not good either. I'm hoping they thought about that as well.
My presentation this evening looks more at what wind power really means for the state. A lot of us just use electricity, we don't really think about it. I don't know if anybody here's noticed their electricity bill in the last 3 to 5 years, but mine's taken off like a skyrocket. It's really, really quite a difficult thing to manage. And the impact of wind power and some of our misguided attempts to manage climate change, not to say that managing climate change is misguided, but the way we're going about it certainly is, are reasons why our power is getting more expensive and why industry in this state in particular is really, really struggling. So the big lines there are on the colour code, all the different high tension power lines. These aren't the little ones outside on the street, these are the big ones on towers, right? And those things, in principle, connect all the different generators around the country to each other. And in terms of network engineering, that's a good thing to do because it allows you to provide reliability of supply, okay? So if a generator has to go out of service for maintenance or fault conditions or something, you can plug in another one to it, to the network, and the lights stay on. So the different players in the grid are the power generators, the transmission companies, the people who own the big towers, the distributors, that's the people who own the little towers and the substation on the corner of your street. The retailers, that's the folks who send you the power bill. The so-called wholesale market, the kind of artificial construct where power is bid for, I'll cover that in a minute. And us at the bottom, the consumers, homes, business, industry and utilities. And electricity is a central part of modern society, and it's used in a lot of places where you don't first think about it. For example, the town sewer is almost certainly relying on electric pumps. So when electricity becomes expensive, everything takes a hit. This is a diagram of the market from the Australian Bureau of Agricultural Resources and Energy, Energy in Australia Report 2011, and it shows the flow of money through the marketplace. You can see we've got consumers over there on the right giving money to retailers. Retailers take that money, they give a little bit of it to the distributors, they give some of it to the AEMO, which is kind of the market, and it then flows out to the generators. And as Brad said earlier, he was talking about people like BHP buying their power direct. That's this bit over here, industrial customers buying direct. But for most of us, we're on the right-hand side of that diagram. So in the South Australian context, the so-called market isn't working all that well for us because we've got one distributor, SA Power Networks, and that's owned mostly by someone from Hong Kong, I think. No, sorry, I got that wrong. That's Chinese, that one. Electronet is the one that's owned in Hong Kong. The generators are base load, which is coal generators. When they say base load, they mean load that you can rely on. And then there's the wind generators and so-called peaking generators. Peaking generators are things like natural gas plants. The reason they call them peaking is that if there's a need to rapidly supply extra generation to the grid to cover an urgent need or a high peak need, these things spin up very, very quickly. These are kind of the sports cars of power generators, if you like, whereas the base load coal generators are more like your heavy vehicles. They're all right once they're going, but they're difficult to get going. The generators bid prices for supply into the market. So they go, we're going to burn some coal and sell our power for $100 per megawatt hour. Or we're going to, when the wind blows, we're going to sell you some power for 30 or 40 or 50 or $100 per megawatt hour. So hold that thought for a minute, because this is how wind power impacts our bill. So this is this pie is the price, the bills that electricity consumers pay. Over half of it in South Australia comes from network costs. I'll put this on the net later if you like. Part of it is from wholesale energy costs, 21%. 13% is retail costs, and these two smaller bits up the top, 4% of the direct carbon costs. So that's the carbon tax that's just been wound back, and 8% comes from other green energy costs, the RET and things like that directly. But the effect of wind on our bill, wind blows out network costs, and I'll show you why in a minute. And it also blows out the wholesale energy costs, and I'll show you why that is too. So the rules regarding how much we can be charged for electricity is managed by a national body called the Australian Energy Regulator. It used to be managed by ESCOSA, but last February our Minister for Energy, Kutsuntonis, handed that power from ESCOSA over to the federal government. And when I rang the federal government to ask them about that, the AER, they didn't know anything about it. So we've fallen through the cracks there. Yeah, well, we're only small states, so that's part of the problem, I think. The 2006 energy rules limited the AER's ability to amend revenue proposals, because what happens is network businesses like Electronet go, let's increase the size of the interconnect to Victoria. That'll be good for everybody. The old rules actually guaranteed them a return. So every time they put a wire up or a pole in the ground, it was really quite a good investment for them. Even though maybe we already had enough power wires and we didn't actually need more. So you take that as one slice of the problem. The next slice is that the South Australian government for many years now has felt that encouraging wind power developments will be good for the economy, and they've completely failed to understand the damage that it's doing. So they've got at the development plans and the planning laws and the bits of the problem that the state government has control over, and basically thrown open the doors to the wind industry. So you've got bizarre situations like you're not allowed to put a galvanised iron shed in the hill's face, but you're allowed to put a wind turbine because of the way the state government rewrote the planning rules. Electronet has identified that increasing the capacity of the Haywood, one of the Victorian interconnects, would provide capacity to export more wind power from South Australia to the eastern states, because South Australia is only 6% of the national demand, and that's falling. And the way we keep losing industry, it's going to fall even further. So we don't need more capacity from the Victorian coal generators. The existing pipe, if you like, is big enough. The other thing about wind, and the thing that really riles me most about wind, is its ability to completely fall in a hole. When it's not windy, there's no power. And you would sort of, I think some people and some politicians think that somehow the power grid, all the wires, can magically store energy. So if you put wind energy into it, it'll be around and it'll be good. But it won't. With wind energy, it's like a sailing ship. You can only move when it's windy. And anybody who remembers the old free lights systems they used to have, the 32 volt system, there were two important bits of that, weren't there? There was the generator and the battery. These big wind turbines that they're trying to push on us, there's no battery, there's no way of storing that amount of energy. So that's where Brad was coming from earlier when he said you need, if you're going to have a wind generator, you need something else as well to cover the hole when it falls over. So this is an example of overnight from the 30th of April to the 1st of May, and I've got hundreds of these examples. This is the output of the wind farms based on their capacity, because when they say, oh, we're going to have a 3 megawatt wind turbine, 3 megawatts is flat out. It's like quoting the horsepower figure for your car. You never really, well, you hardly ever drive them flat out. Mostly you're generating much less power. A typical capacity factor for a wind generator is about 30%. Now, when that whole shooting match is running flat out, every wind power station in the state under strong wind conditions, and strong wind means enough wind but not too much, because if it's actually too windy they have to back them off or they break. So if you've got just right wind conditions, you might get 1,200 megawatts out of South Australia. That's flat bickies. But all of those things standing still, uselessly in the still air, didn't even produce 100 megawatts overnight that night. And that's fairly common. In engineering, we refer to that as common mode failure. When you think of like an aircraft, the reason we build an aircraft with, say, 2 motors, one really good reason is that if one motor stops, you can still fly because they're independently powered and there's all that diversity. But they don't do that with wind. There's only one lot of air, and if that lot of air stops moving, all of your turbines stop. You know, you could double the capacity, you could double the number of turbines in the state, and it would not have helped you at 10 o'clock that night, because it would have been standing still. This is the supply and demand for that same period. So here's the total electricity demand for South Australia, and that's sitting, sorry it's so small, it's sitting about 20-odd thousand megawatts all of that time. And that whole night, it was pretty consistent overnight. So our thirst for power didn't change. I mean, people's fridges and stuff had to be running, and hospitals had to keep going and all that sort of stuff. So the power demand didn't shift, but the wind absolutely dropped dead. And the electricity came from coal generators and other sources, the interconnect to Victoria under some conditions. So typically the South Australian demand's fairly low, around 1,600 megawatts for both of those days. Have I told a lie there? Yeah, you got the SA demands. Yes. Oh, sorry. It's so small I missed it. That 20,000 megawatt figure, that's the whole country. South Australia is down here at about 1,600 megawatts. Sorry, that's right down the bottom. And that's reflective of our population and our industry. There's only like, 1 and a bit million people here compared to sort of 3 million just in Melbourne by itself. And there's a lot of heavy power using industries up and down the east coast. So in terms of the power mix, we aren't a big part of it. So when the wind industry stand up and clap hands and go, South Australia's produced 1/3 of its power from wind, it's like, big deal, guys. Here's the main game, not faffing about in these small areas where the demand is lighter. So our demand in the state is around 1,600 megawatts for both those days. During a heat wave, during our hot summer days when all the air conditioners are running, it peaks out at around 3,200 megawatts, and that's where we do start to draw on the eastern interconnect in a fairly big way. But for those two nights, for that night, sorry, the demand was actually less than our baseload generation, and we didn't rely at all on the wind, which was lucky because there wasn't any. So given that, if it had been windy, where would the wind energy go? Well, most of the time, those big towers are bringing energy from the Victorian coal stations in the Latrobe Valley, I think is where they are, into South Australia, except when it's windy. Under those conditions, because our demand's fairly light, energy is exported back across the same wires back to the eastern states, where, as Brad told us, the suppliers are obliged to buy wind power if it's on offer. Larger network capacity, so more of this, would allow more wind to be sent from South Australia to the eastern states. And I went to an Engineers Australia presentation last year to hear Renewables SA, the state government pro-wind energy encouragement department, if you like. They gave a presentation. I wanted to hear what they had to say. And I was staggered. The person from Renewables SA stood up and said the operation of the electricity market is unfortunate for customers. Everybody's doing all right out of this damn thing except the customers. And of course the customers, it's bigger than just someone watching their telly or running their air conditioner. It's industry and aged care and all of it. It impacts every fragment of our society. So it's pretty badly broken. Now, I said earlier that in my pie chart that wind power also affects the wholesale price, and this is another falsehood that is promulgated by the wind industry. They say that when it's windy, there's an increase in the supply of power in the grid, so there is a decrease in the wholesale price, which is true, but there's a big but at the end of it. Now, if you look at these charts here, this is the average half-hourly maximum generation availability in South Australia since 2011. And you can see it falls in a hole there, second quarter 2013. What happened there is one of the power generators made a decision to take one of the coal generators offline. And that increased the reliance on wind power. But because wind is variable, taking that generator offline caused a shortfall in base load supply. So we didn't actually have quite enough. That meant that we increased our reliance on peaking fast responsing generators, gas generators. And those costs, of course, get passed on to us. South Australia has, in fact, the most expensive electricity in the entire Commonwealth. And from time to time you read that we have the most expensive electricity in the world. And really, this is the generators, like the companies, like AGL, who have got coal and they've got gas and they've got wind. These guys are really playing pretty dirty. They're switching off a generator that they're kind of getting not much return from, and they are using the shortfall that a still day creates to fire up a more expensive generator at a time when the market really needs it because there's not enough supply. So we're prepared to pay top dollar to get some power so the lights stay on. It's really very dirty playing, and there are examples of the wind of the power generators withdrawing bids, those standing bids to the market. They'll take out a bid of $200 for a megawatt hour and replace it with the maximum legal ceiling bid. So if their going rate was sort of a couple $100, can anyone guess what the maximum legally allowed amount per megawatt hour is under the rules? Yeah?
About 12,000.
Yeah, $13,100 now because they index it. Used to be 12,000. Yeah. Yeah, so they took away a bid of 200, flicked on the gas generator and put the bid back in at 13 grand, cleaned up. And of course we paid for that. And you know, every day we hear about another company winding back their activities in the state. 120 jobs from Arnott's. What do you use to bake biscuits? An oven? This is the mix of power in the different states in the country. South Australia's got the highest penetration of wind to any electricity market in the world. The intermittent output, I've kind of already covered that. Because the wind comes and goes, we have tight supply conditions when there's low wind. And that increases our reliance on gas power generation. Gas generation in and of itself is actually all right, but the way it's used in a peaking mode, it's fairly inefficient use of the gas. It's much like driving your car really hard, like accelerating at the lights and then braking again, whereas if you just try and coast along, your economy is much better. So we're kind of operating this gas plant, which is reasonably low carbon emission by comparison to coal. We're operating it in a very inefficient way in order to accommodate the vagaries of the wind supply. And we're paying crippling rates because of it. One of the other things that the wind people like to bang on about and remind us of is how much carbon emission we're saving by having wind power. In 2012-13, and the reason I'm quoting old figures is that they're the most up-to-date because it takes the government a long time to put the reports together. Hydroelectricity, this is across the national grid, applied 9% of the national electricity market electricity. We consumed more water than could be replenished by rainfall. So by the end of the season, our reserves were down to 40% lower. But luckily it was a rainy season and they were replenished. Carbon emissions from electricity were reduced 4.5% from just shy of a tonne per megawatt hour to 0.875 per megawatt hour. That same period, wind contributed 3.4% of the electricity, and gas increased in that period. And it's very difficult to unpick from that exactly how much of this figure, this little reduction of 4.5%, is attributable to wind, especially given it's very likely masked by the very large output, 9% out of hydropower. But they don't ever fill in that detail. They just quote the headline figures. This is one I put in kind of a bit of a laugh. You sometimes hear the true believers of wind energy saying we should have 100% reliance on it, and South Australia is a model because you've got 1/3 of the way and you've only got 2/3 to go and all this. If wind was such a good idea, we'd unplug the interconnect. But we don't. That's the last thing we do. We've got that much wind, we need the interconnect. If we had 100%, well, the total national electricity was 200 terawatt hours. Wind contribution to that, they tell us, was 3.4%. So based on some numbers from the Clean Energy Council, which is the wind industry lobby group, they reckon we've got about 1,400 turbines. So we'd need 40,000 more turbines to ever run the country on wind. And we'd need it to be windy all the time. So given it's not windy all the time, we would also need 199 terawatt hours of something else to run for those calm days. So it's a fairy tale, really. And it's misguided to pursue it. It's costing us a fortune, it's crippling us, it's not helping the amount of carbon emission we're doing. It's completely misguided at every single level. It's maddening.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. So we hear a bit about matching supply and demand, and this is perhaps where my sort of, engineering kind of mindset really sort of comes to it. Most forms of electricity generation, and put aside any of your emotions about any of the different technologies, most of them have a way of controlling the supply. So a coal generator can burn less coal, a gas generator can burn more or less gas, or the old oil generators or diesel or whatever, or if you've got a great big dam and you're running water through a gravity turbine, you can adjust the valve. So you've got some means of storing the energy until you want the electricity. But with wind, there is no way of storing it. And in the industry, the power industry, wind is referred to as a chaotic supply. Like it's very difficult to predict. And yeah, even if you could predict it, it places demands on the infrastructure and other generators that they can't meet. So the electricity consumer has sort of completely fallen through the cracks in this mess. Everybody is getting a slice of the pie. Everybody is doing all right out of this, except people who are trying to use electricity or run a business or something. I walk into a corner deli and I look at the row of fridges running, and those things are running 24/7. I just think, you poor buggers, what is that costing? It's a mess. The environment, which I think at the beginning wasn't the whole point of doing this, that we wanted to save the environment. That's right. Trouble is, these constructions are so big and so intrusive that you in fact do a lot of environmental damage by building them. So we're kind of achieving not much, if anything. We're doing a lot of damage and we're destroying the economy. And really, I wrote this a little while ago, but every day it's a prediction that looks more true. We're going to wind up as an economic wasteland with wind turbines and transmission infrastructure that exists to serve everybody except the people who live here. And this could be our new number plate, the power state, and we can put turbines on it. I hope not. I hope it doesn't come to that. And unfortunately, while we're preoccupied with wind power and while we keep putting it up around the place and making people who haven't thought about it think it's all good and it's all okay, every dollar that goes into that is a dollar that could have gone into researching something more promising. Like geothermal has some really tough technical problems associated with it. Now, if we were to put some research dollars into that, then maybe that would be a better long-term payoff than another wind turbine that's going to stop when it's not windy.
Isn't that a good time with it, though?
No, that's right, yeah. And the RET is a system that doesn't so much encourage research and development as it encourages rollout of whatever's available now. And in terms of megawatt hours, for a renewable investor, it's more attractive to put up a wind turbine that Siemens have already invented and you know is going to give you some dollars back than gripping up some of the tough challenges with some of the other technologies. That's why the Clean Energy Council, which is a name that sounds like it covers everything, is dominated by wind players. So the RET is not the right mechanism to encourage that sort of work. In the Clean Energy Act, there are no requirements for renewable energy suppliers to guarantee reliability of supply. If there was one sentence added to that to require a level of reliability of supply, the same as is applied to coal and other generators, then that would encourage people to look more carefully at the tough problems and stop just cashing in on wind.
Wind turbines, they make all these noises, they're real low frequencies, which sort of make you a bit frantic sometimes. I heard you get a few of them in a row and they'll make this noise and all of a sudden it'll just like move the floor and you go, well, I wish that was not there. Yeah, well, I hope they really think about these things before they put them up as well.
Yes, you'll find where I'm going is sort of away from graphs and things, although I've got a couple of pie charts. More into, I guess, feel good. I don't know what you'd call it. And I've asked this question: can wind farms save the planet? Because I think that the subtext that Paul was talking about then is that somehow the environmental issues that we face all around the world today can in some way be helped by us erecting wind farms and using electricity from wind farms. In our daily lives, we get a certain amount of money. There's things that we have to spend. You got to pay. What you got to pay your mortgage. You got to pay your rent. You got to pay your rates. You got to pay basic stuff like that. Then there's some things that you should pay. Insurance, maybe. Funeral insurance. People of my age, they get phone calls and you've got to have a funeral insurance because your loved ones, they don't want to spend money burying you. They want to spend your money burying you. You ought to put some money away for savings. Should. And then that little bit there is what we got left that we can spend. Now, whether we are individuals, whether we're a family, whether we're a company or a government, basically the same things work. And if we spend too much, then something else has got to give. Or if the must-pay things increase, then it's going to eat into that slice. And that spending bit is the critical point, because that spending bit is actually the bit that enables economies to grow. If nobody's got any money to spend and we're only paying what we've got to pay, then there's no growth point for an economy. And we go flat and we stagnate, or else we start to go down. For a number of reasons, electricity prices rise wherever wind farms become part of energy policy. We've had a fair amount of discussion about what's happening in Australia. It happens in other countries in the world, Denmark, for instance. Between us and Denmark, we have the highest saturation of wind farms per head of population. Between us and Denmark, we have the highest price of electricity. So we're both up there on both counts, and it's not a coincidence. So that pie I just had up there is fixed, as I said. When power prices go up and up and up, other slices of that pie got to shrink, shrink, shrink. And that means, as I said, that that discretionary spending shrinks and our economy stops growing. If our economy stops growing, we run out of jobs, and we've got a place called South Australia. So at least in South Australia, we're not going to be saved by wind farms, no matter what the government tells you. There's another pie. Looks almost the same as the other one. Goodwill pie. You feel goodwill. Some of us feel goodwill towards our families. I understand that others may not, but generally that's where you first start showing your goodwill anyway to people who are closest to you. And then your friends, and then society in general, your mates down at the bowling club, for instance. You come here and you have a good time. They're not your family. They might be your friends, but they're people you socialise with. And you might want to do good things. And then the planet. For most people, the planet comes last, and for some people, it's a long way last. For most of us here, it's kind of up there, I think. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But basically, the same sort of rules apply. It's a limited pie. And I reckon goodwill can be defined as a willingness to be involved, to be committed, to contribute. We want to give. We want to do something for someone else. We don't want to take. Communal goodwill has various outlets. We might honour sports heroes. We might support newly elected governments. We might work to save the planet. Our goodwill extends in that sort of way. But, and this is a feature of humans, if you watch them carefully, that it only lasts as long as the object stays worthy. If a sports hero gets into drugs, it's like going from here to there almost instantly. Nobody wants to know him. He's evil. Broken promises from governments have exactly the same effect. You know, we vote them in and then they say, well, we're not going to do all those things we promised. Opinion polls just go down like a lead balloon. And failed environmental initiatives. We might want to support somebody to do something to save the planet, and then if it goes a bit sour, we'll dump it like hot potatoes, even if the idea was good. That goodwill ends. So there's limits to these things, and whether we think that's a good idea or not, we should have goodwill all the time, that's what I think, but in reality, we do sort of tend to sort of moderate it when things aren't looking too good. What's this got to do with wind farms? Stay tuned. There's another pie. I hope you had dinner before you came. Just looking at the environmental benefits of wind farms. Now, the sizes of these slices of this pie aren't particularly, they're just for. One of the reasons we like wind farms is because they're so-called green energy. We've heard that already tonight. Nobody's actually defined what it is. And then there's renewable energy. Well, that sounds good too. We'll go with that. And then this one, free power. Well, that's wonderful. We've got so many wind turbines. How come my power bills are going up? If it's free, how come it's not free for me? But it sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds real good. And of course, we save carbon. So that sort of looks like a pill, doesn't it? It's the wind farm pill. You take it because it's got all those good things in it. We'll see. Has it got all those good things in it? What is renewable energy? We've spoken about it. We've heard it. People talk about it. Renewable energy. What does it mean? Well, on one level, it means that the energy source can keep coming on, like the sun gets up every day. More energy. I feel warm, feels great. If I've got a solar panel, it's charging. If I've got a hot water system, solar hot water system, it's getting hot. So every day that happens. That's renewable. Wind, renewable. It blows, it doesn't, it blows, it doesn't. So it comes back. We don't actually have to do anything. It'll just rock up one day and be windy, and then next day it won't, and that's renewable. The value of renewable energy, of course, is we don't need to actually dig anything out of the ground or pollute anything. It just seems the ideal solution. How does it compare with coal energy? Well, once upon a time, coal energy was sun. Made plants grow. Lots and lots and lots of plants, buckets of plants. And then they sort of fell and they got laid on with more and more and more, and it got pressed and the water went out, and now you got coal. So it's like this dirty great big compost heap from millions and millions of years ago. Then we dig it up and we burn it. We're actually burning that sun's energy and all that carbon dioxide out of that atmosphere way back then. We're turning it into whatever we turn it into today. Coal is renewable. It's just that it's going to take like a million or billion or a zillion years for another bunch of coal, and we're going to have a very wet, steamy, warm, carbon dioxide rich environment to make the coal for the next 100 million years or whatever. But it is renewable, and there are peat bogs in existence on the planet today where the equivalent of coal is being made. It just takes a long time. But in the context of human existence, coal is deemed to be not renewable. And that's a fair call, because I don't think anyone here is going to be around in 100 million years. But does that mean it's good or bad? If there are negatives to renewable energy, what are they? And have those negatives been taken into account when we sort of get all excited about renewable energy? And are there any long-term views that also need to be considered in assessing the value of renewable energy? Let's not quite have the coal length of time span, but we do need to perhaps look to the end of this century, for instance. Maybe 100 years past that. We are in a country which hopes to be around for a long time. What is this country going to look like in 100 or 200 years? Is renewable energy going to be a part of that picture? Well, you kind of think it ought to be, but in what form? Well, I'm sorry about the lights. It looks really good on my screen. This is what we don't want the Earth to look like. Sort of coal-fired power stations, smog and smoke. It all looks pretty gloomy and horrible. That's what we're trying to overcome, that picture. Well, if wind farms could save the planet, if they really could, what would need to happen? Well, they need to be able to stop coal and other fossil fuels being burnt, so we don't have that picture. Do they? Well, according to Paul, who showed some figures up here earlier, it's pretty doubtful. Pretty doubtful. And one of the main reasons, of course, is that we got the lights on here. Now, my computer doesn't need electricity. Well, not for another few hours anyway. So I could stand up here and talk, and my screen would work, and all the lights could be off, but that thing wouldn't work because that's plugged in there. But I could be pretty animated. So you could have this thing, we could do this in the dark, but there's people drinking beer and it comes out of a pretty cool tap, and I reckon that needs electricity somewhere in its system, because I'm damn sure you don't want any hot beer. And there's an urn back here for tea and coffee afterwards for those who don't want beer. Now that's chugging away and that's using electricity. We get up in the morning and we want to have a cup of coffee, we might want to have a hot shower, we might want to do all this stuff, all of which, for most of us, means we've got to have electricity. You know, the last few weeks, we might have had 20 days of frosts where I live. You know why you get a frost? Very still, very cold air. You know what happens when you have still, cold air? You ain't got any wind power. So all of you people who love the coffee and the toast in the morning, you'd be rubbing sticks together or doing whatever you do, and hot shower, and whatever else. That's just the reality. Until we find a way of having a renewable energy system which can eliminate coal and other fuels, then we can't really claim that we've succeeded. And even if we go part of the way, what we're actually doing is going down a path that is never ever going to achieve our end. We'll keep going down it because it's the only thing we can think about. And we'll just keep going and we'll keep going. We'll get here and we'll look back at sort of a zillion wind turbines and we still haven't got to where we wanted to go. And then we've got to go all the way back here again and work out which direction we're supposed to be going. This is the big problem with seizing on a silver bullet that actually isn't a silver bullet. These things cannot ever deliver you a society such as we have without some form of fossil fuel. That's a fact. But if wind farms could save the planet, their operation would need to allow us to undo the damage already done. What's that damage? Well, the problem is the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's the problem. Well, I'm taking the straight line, climate scientist. The problem is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the problem. But as I just told you before, if you want a whole lot of coal to form, you've got to have buckets of carbon dioxide because all those vegetative things are sucking it out of the air, growing big, forming jungles and everything. And our Earth was like that once. It was hot and steamy and humid, and there weren't any humans around, which is probably why people don't want to see those conditions back again. But the other thing that they would do is continue into the future. We need to have a future technology that's going to look after us. A wind farm's going to do this. How do they measure up? You probably won't be surprised at the answers. Wind farms do not stop coal and other fossil fuels from being burnt. And in fact, we could cover every hilltop in South Australia and still not achieve this. And that's the reality. That's a cold, hard, brutal reality that they're doomed to fail if we want to see 100% of renewables. Wind is never going to contribute very much of that. Unless. There is an unless to all this, and I'll get to that later. Industrial wind turbines actually use electricity. They're users of electricity every second of their working life. So if the wind's not turning, those turbines are absorbing electricity from somewhere else, from some fossil fuel generator somewhere in the grid. Or they've got gas or diesel generators on site because they have to have electricity, they have to work. They've got pumps and computers and all sorts of things. They've got motors which are making those blades move a little bit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Coal-fired generators burn a fairly steady feed of coal. And then that heats water, it makes steam. Sitting over there is a generator. As the gentleman over here mentioned, when you have a look at those pictures of coal-fired power stations and you see stuff coming out of those chimneys, most of that is water vapour. Because those things they show you are the cooling towers. The actual other things are quite different. That steam can either be shushed into the generator and sort of at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, rumping around. But then people start to turn off their ovens and they start to switch off the telly and they go to bed. And we saw those graphs where the power kind of all night hardly does anything. It's just it's just running fridges and street lights. It's a fairly low and constant demand. Now, the guy in the coal-fired power station, he knows that about 6 o'clock in the morning, suddenly everyone's going to get up and start flicking on switches. But he can't just say, oh, I'll knock off and I'll come in at 5 to 6 and turn it all on again, because it's going to take him hours to get that water hot. So that coal just keeps burning all night. And they just keep running a little bit of electricity out. And then come 6 o'clock, whoosh the steam into the turbine and away we all go again. The use of coal doesn't vary very much. It's fairly constant right the way through the, as the man said, trainload of coal every day. No matter what's going on, it's a trainload of coal every day. And that's the reason that wind farms don't stop coal being burnt, because we live in a society that wants electricity all the time. So the man in the coal station, he's still burning his coal, and the wind farm comes on and he lets a bit more steam up the chimney, and the wind drops and he tightens the tap and it goes into the generator. But the coal supply varies almost not at all. You know, the man in the coal-fired power station, he actually gets fined if he doesn't, there's penalties if he can't supply electricity, because he doesn't get a contract to supply unless he guarantees to supply it when it's ready, when it's needed, when it's wanted. So the man in the wind farm, he can just sort of sit back in Melbourne and twiddle his computers, and there's a bit of wind over there at Hallett or, you know, Snowtown or wherever, and some wind comes in. Oh, we're getting some wind now. Well, let's put some electricity in the grid because somebody has to buy that. And then the wind stops, there's no penalty. It's a system designed to encourage wind power, and maybe the reasoning was good, that because we want to encourage this renewable energy stuff, but the people who did the thinking never went a tenth of the way down the journey they should have gone to devise a system that's logical. So if coal consumption is effectively unchanged, what have wind farms achieved? Well, you've heard tonight, they've achieved higher electricity prices due to the RECs and network costs. They've achieved the death of birds and bats. I won't go into this in any detail, but hundreds of thousands or millions of birds around the world are killed every year in wind turbines. It's achieved less discretionary spending in our economy. And we just have to look at the state of South Australia to see what's wrong with the state of South Australia. It has achieved profits for wind farm companies, so somebody's winning out of this. It has achieved the destruction of visual amenity in our landscapes, and there's parts of South Australia where I don't even want to drive anymore because it just looks like, well, it looks like crap as far as I'm concerned. Some of you might like it, but the only sure technology for taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is a tree. No other way of doing it. Wind farms are always placed where trees should be planted, usually on bare hills of little agricultural value. I wrote this to World Wildlife Fund today. They wanted me to get on AGL's website and blah-hoo about, you know, renewable energy targets, so I wrote a long letter, and that was one of the things I pointed out. You know, that strip of hills up there that they want to put these wind farms on would probably take about 1 billion tonnes of CO2 out of the atmosphere if you put the cane and the palm one together. And if they take 1 billion tonnes of CO2, they release about 2/3 of that roughly as oxygen back in the atmosphere, and then you got all the rest of it sitting there in trees. There's a lot of stuff happens under the ground when you have vegetation. There's a lot of carbon actually under the ground in living material when you've got a forest. And so there's buckets and buckets of carbon dioxide could be removed by putting trees up there. But no carbon savings and no trees means no environmental benefit. Zip. And what about the future? You're all hanging on this. Some of you have seen this. Why is a house? Why is the house what? Why is the house? Why is the house? Well, the answer is because electricity cannot run by itself. This is one of those riddles that don't make a lot of sense till you think about it. But if you took this light and you said there'll be no more electricity ever again in the world, that'll never ever be a light. And there's a heap of stuff in our society, like a huge amount of it. This very computer, eventually I've got to plug this into something, and that thing, and all this stuff here, that you take electricity away and you might have put something in the fridge, in the shed, put some tools in it, but by and large our lives would be very different. Electricity is essential. It's like water and food. We've got to have it. It's become that in our society. But we can't eat it, and we can't drink it, and we can't wash in it, we can't live in it, we can't ride on it. It might assist us to do all those things, but electricity by itself is absolutely useless. It needs resources. So if you've got electricity, you've got to use resources. It's simply a tool for consumption of resources. And those resources here in front of us, there's steel and there's plastic and there's, all sorts of stuff. But all those resources, they're running out. I'd like to live somewhere like that. Most of us probably would. This sort of, the idea of a planet which is beautiful with nice houses and there's water and there's this and there's that. We all want to live like that in some way. Okay, I've asked this question, can wind farms save the planet? I guess, to be fair, who said they could? Am I just making a straw dog? Saying, here's a statement, who said that? Well, I don't care, I'm just going to knock it down. Well, if you think about it, they've been given the bulk of political attention compared with other renewable energy sources. They've been given unprecedented access to our landscape. I don't know of any other form of development that has been given such access to the landscape of South Australia. In this sort of section of the hills that we are particularly concerned with, as Paul said, you can't erect a galvanised iron shed if it can be seen from the flatlands. And yet you can stick up a turbine with no height restriction. They could be 200 metres, they could be 400 metres if they build them that big. Well, taller than any building in Adelaide, and there's no height restriction in the development plan. So if someone come along with a 250 metre tall turbine, there's nothing in the development plan to say that's not acceptable. There isn't any other development anywhere in South Australia that's been given the approval to build these things basically anywhere they want to. Absolutely. It's completely unprecedented. So somebody thinks there's a lot going for these things. And they've been given almost unfettered access to the electricity market. As I said earlier, as Paul said, they do not have to guarantee continuity of supply. I make some wind power, you got to buy it. You don't want to buy it? Tough. You got to buy it. Correct. I've got some wine. It's organic wine. The vines are hand pruned. The grapes are hand picked. There is no additives in the wine at all. Completely natural. Now, I want a deal like this. I want to be able to sell my wine to anywhere. You've got to buy my wine because it's organic and it's got a certificate that says it's wonderful before you buy anybody else's wine. And the other thing is, I want a rebate from the government of equal to the price of that bottle of wine, because that's what the wind farm companies are getting. 50% of their income comes from the renewable energy certificate. I want that deal for my organic wine. Taxpayers' money. That's right. Are you going to support me? Yeah, well, some of you would, because you know the wine's pretty good. But somebody really thinks these wind farms are so important that they're given this sort of express pathway through life. But I don't reckon wind farms can save the planet. And the big problem with all of this is that those pies I showed you right at the beginning, there's only a certain size. And once that's been spent, once the money's been spent, once we've sort of subsidised something and it's gone along this road and it hasn't achieved what we want, where does the money come from to look at the hot rocks? Where does the money come from to look at solar thermal? Where does the money come from to look at wave or tidal technologies? Where is that money? Well, that's gone. And the goodwill of the community to support this renewable energy experimentation is also gone. We as a community will only tolerate doing something like this for a certain period of time. It's going to be very hard to sell a new renewable energy thrust because we've gone so far down this one, we've basically turned this state broke. And I'm not a Liberal voter. I voted Labor or Green all my life, but I do hope that the Liberals can get this review of the RET through, because if you've got renewable energy, it ought to actually achieve something positive in reducing carbon emissions. If it's not doing that, then the whole thing's a fraud. It's a rort. We're being taken down the road and we're being shown this wonderful thing and it's not actually delivering. The bigger picture is this, that Australians currently use about 7 times their share of Earth's resources. 7 times. You think about how many people in your house, multiply that by 7. How many people in your car when you drive around, multiply that by 7. It gets a bit squeezy, doesn't it? 7 times, or if it's somebody from another country, 1/7 is what they've got. By the end of this century, the average person in Australia will not be able to afford steel, copper, aluminium, etc. Resources of those basic commodities are such that by the end of this century, people like us sitting here, I don't think anyone here is a multi-millionaire. If they are, my pocket's empty. Nobody sitting here will be able to afford to buy a car. We won't be able to afford to buy copper or aluminium, which is used to generate, to conduct electricity. So electricity is going to become useless if it's in a world where nobody can afford to use it. There's a broader picture here, and I think we could leave everything in the ground right now, switch off the lights, drive our cars for the last time, hopefully we get home, don't dig any more petrol or oil, we just stop our lives right here and now. We're going to make a pact to do that? Nope. Unfortunately, and we can say, oh, like, we'll be dead by the end of the century, someone else's problem. Your grandkids' problem and their children. That's whose problem it's going to be. So it is a couple of generations away. But I just want to give you a little sidestep here. On the property that Rob and I live on, there are a number of shelter trees that Paramount people used to live in before we killed them all. There is also one tree where the doorway, the bark's been cut, but no one's ever come back, because they're not alive anymore, to continue the job of turning that tree into a house. Looking at the tree, I'd reckon probably another 100 years before it's really ready. Think about it, that's 100 years it's been cut, another 100 years before it could be a dwelling. There you had somebody cut that door 200 years before it's ever going to be possibly used. knowing that they would never ever use it, knowing their kids wouldn't or their grandkids wouldn't. If the Paramount people who are here before us could see at least 200 years in the future and make that sort of plans, when are we going to learn to get that sort of long-sightedness? Instead of trying to stretch out our consumption lust, put up wind turbines because that makes us feel better, we can use electricity because it's green and it's free, apparently, we should be working towards a very different future. When I say we, I'm talking about us as a society, as an ongoing nation, as a whatever. We're going to get to a point where that future will arrive, and we, sitting here in this room, and our successors will be very, very unprepared. My view is that fooling ourselves that we're using clean, green and renewable power only hides the fact that we need to use much less of everything, not more, and we need to do that now, not later. We shouldn't let greedy corporates and corrupted politicians fool us with fake premises. Wind farms, they are and they always have been false prophets. They look great, but in actual fact, all they do is suck you in, suck you in, suck you in. And we think that as we keep consuming, as long as it's green, it's okay. Greed is greed. Doesn't matter what colour it's wearing, it's still greed. And so, if you take anything away from this, I know most of you don't like wind turbines, but at least stop being fooled, and as Brad said, actually start writing, start doing something. Don't be fooled any longer. Thank you. It's about $3 million to put a turbine up, and probably 2 million of that, or 2.5 million is actually that, the nacelle, what they call a nacelle. So if the blades, everything blows apart, basically, that whole structure is probably $2.5 million worth. Look, the fire issue is, yes, significant. The facts are that aerial bombers can't work within a wind farm even if the blades aren't turning, because any structure, because mostly you have a bushfire when you have strong winds, and if you fly in structures like that, even if they're not turning, there's so much turbulence. These things are, the planes are pretty heavy with all that water in them, and they've got to be able to have a nice, easy run in. The other thing is that if you drop the water from way up above, of course, it's pointless. So your ground crews, of course, won't have aerial protection. So they'll be up there trying to put this damn thing out, and you can't get any water to help them. So if they get caught on a ridge with a fire coming towards them in the middle of a wind, they might be on a lovely big road in the wind farm, but the fact is that as we saw the fires in February, they jumped big roads, they went through walls. There was nothing that was going to stop those fires. And if you're in the way, stuck in a truck, and most roads and wind farms only go to the edge of the cliff, you're knackered, and you can't get planes. So it's a significant issue, and of course it adds just another thing in the landscape which can actually start a fire. If the nacelle goes up, kaboom, and starts, in a strong wind, starts throwing bits, how far will the bits go? Could be several hundred metres. Our organisation is not funded by Clive Palmer, by any coal company, by any political party, by any religious organisation. We're entirely funded out of our back pockets, and sometimes picking grapes, and my back pocket's empty. And we'd like to thank the Mannum Bowling Club for letting us use the premise.
I don't know, all this thought about wind turbines, yeah, well, me either. I'm not seeming to like them. It's starting to make me feel really down, depressed and angry. Yeah, and me too. You know, I don't like you anymore. You're my neighbour and you like the things. Well, no, I don't. I just have to have them, I think, because that's what they said we got to do. Well, I don't like you, and you can take this. Ah! Yeah, not so good, they are. break my eyes off in a sec. Oh, this is no good. We shouldn't be fighting like this. No, we shouldn't be fighting. Let's just go our separate ways, you know, and somehow we're going to live with it. Well, I'll go my way and you go your way. Oh, okay, bye.